Hey class, so today we're starting to talk about George Washington's presidency. We understand what the Bill of Rights is, the Constitution, we have that framework set up. Now it's time to really dive in and see what the man himself did as a president. So what I'd like you to do while watching this video is to have a Google Doc open, the one I have on Classroom, and please just write down everything that's underlined or in red. Should be pretty straightforward, shouldn't be too bad, something easy, and at least educational, I hope, since you're probably struggling to get a lot of education right now. All right, here we go. George Washington's presidency. If you have to pause it, pause it. If you don't, even better. Here we go. So he was the first president. He was elected in 1789. He's the only president to be ever elected unanimously. What unanimously means is by everybody, every single person. And that's simply because no one ran against him, really. They had a different voting system back then. It was kind of like, okay, who do you want as president? Who do you want as vice president? And pretty much they had these different tickets in a sense. Everyone picked Washington as like their first choice, and then the second choice was John Adams. And since he was the runner-up, he became vice president, which is kind of an awkward thing. The fact that these guys were kind of running against each other, and then they had to work together. Adams didn't really run for president. I think everyone kind of knew no one could beat Washington at this point, but Adams didn't really have to like campaign, neither did Washington. He's the only president that won without campaigning as well, which is obviously unique because even up till this day, presidents or possible presidents are campaigning for multiple years before they even like announce their presidency or even win the presidency itself. So once Washington was in charge, he created 3 different executive departments. These are pretty much like advisory or assistants for him. He called it his cabinet because he said he's like you could almost like open it like a drawer, and he'd pull out like a folder that could allow him to or help him out with whatever he needs at that time. So it's his cabinet, and per se, it's pretty much just a meeting of the minds with a couple chosen individuals. The cabinet today is much larger than 3 people. There's 21 people inside the cabinet today. But back then, there were only 3 people in the cabinet. You had the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. Obviously, he is, I mean, you should know him for a bunch of different things, but at this point, he's kind of like a very good writer. He's pretty well traveled, as in he's been around the world a lot, so he knows a lot of different things about different countries. Secretary of State is not about the state itself, like the states, but about keeping an eye on other countries. So that's Thomas Jefferson's job. Secretary of War is Henry Knox. Henry Knox is an old general that worked under Washington. He was in charge of the artillery, which is why you see him posing with a cannon. And last but not least is a very interesting man, which we're going to talk about more, Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton. He is a young, vivacious upstart of a person who does not get along with a bunch of different people, but he has Washington's ear, and he means well. I mean, he really does want this country to succeed, and so he does fight with Jefferson quite often, but they usually come with it to an amicable agreement because they both know they're working for the country, not for themselves. They just kind of look at how the country should work in different ways. So here's a picture of the cabinet itself. You have Washington on the left, Knox to his left, Hamilton standing, Jefferson, which you should recognize, and Edmund Randolph. He's the Attorney General. He's technically part of the cabinet, but he's just pretty much the lawyer. So he doesn't really have many charges at this point. It's kind of just like an advisory role, pretty much saying what they should or shouldn't do. Interestingly enough, you don't see John Adams in this picture. John Adams actually complained a lot about how being vice president wasn't much of a job. It was actually like his most miserable 4 years of his life, he said. I'm sorry, 8 years of his life. There's not much to do. It's kind of, at this point, just don't die. The job of the vice president is to be the possible next president. And he really doesn't have much to do, so he's really not involved, and you can kind of tell in this picture itself. Really quick, Alexander Hamilton, he's the only founding father to be an immigrant. He was born in the West Indies. His father left at a young age. His mother died of I forget, she died of some sort of sickness. He pretty much started his own shipping business, and then was a lawyer out of New York City. Financial genius, pretty much self-made man. He is like the person who shaped the United States financial system. And he had a couple ideas from the get-go that worked very well to help us pretty much get the country started financially. And this is a very important part of Washington's standard setup for the next 8 years. So Alexander Hamilton's financial plan. Give me a second to write it down, because I know I'm probably going a little fast for you. There's 4 steps to this, and each one of these steps you can kind of even see to this day as why it's important. So step 1, pay off foreign war debt immediately and in full. So after the Revolutionary War, they had accrued a large amount of debt. $12 million doesn't sound much today, but with inflation back then, $12 million is a large amount of money. And they owed us all to France, and France is already having their own financial issues, and they're kind of threatening to be unhappy with America. So if they paid this debt off immediately, it would give some confidence to American economy, and it would make the French happy. The French support us a lot, so why not make your friends happy? Second one, buy back war bonds at face value. War bonds were sold during the Revolutionary War as almost like a loan to the government. The government's pretty much saying, hey, you can get, how about this, you buy this piece of paper for $20, in 4 years, you could get it, we'll buy it back from you for $40. So you can kind of make an investment in the country, and in turn, you can make a little money and help the country by giving them money itself. Unfortunately, the country's out of money, and they can't buy back these war bonds with that premium that they promised. So people are getting unhappy with this. They're kind of sitting with these pieces of paper saying, hey, I bought this, I was trying to help you guys, and now it's worthless. So the United States said, okay, we'll give you your money back. That's the only fair way to really do it. They couldn't really afford to give them that extra money on top of it. And it establishes trust in the country. It gives the idea okay, the country is looking out for me. Unfortunately, some people oppose it, such as Jefferson. He feels that people that bought these war bonds from other people is kind of just unfair. They shouldn't get paid out, but that's just how it goes. That's another story, though. Number 3, assume states' war debt. There was different amounts of debt from different states. They're kind of just taking out lines of credit with independent investors and banks and things of that nature. So they pretty much took all that state debt and they just took it on themselves. They let the states get rid of their debt, which is nice. Lets the states kind of free up money for themselves and help establish the economy. It also kind of gives them, ties all these states together, along with pretty much being thankful to the government for taking this debt. Some states were happy about that. The states that had less debt, such as some southern states, were not very happy, while these northern states and New England, which had a lot of debt, they were very happy about this because that's a lot of debt for them to pay back by themselves. And last but not least, this one didn't last long, but create a bank in the United States. This was a bank for the United States, for its citizens. It's the idea that they can control the amount of monies going in and out. They can control the production of the dollar itself. They can consolidate all American debt into one big pot, and then they can kind of stabilize the economy by allowing the people and the government to work together to reduce this debt that they have. If people are depositing their money, they can also get rid of the debt from the bank itself. So this doesn't last very long, but it definitely helps stabilize America. It helps them make that dollar worth something. It's not just a piece of paper anymore. They're making it worth actual money. All right, so first big thing that Washington has, actually, that if you want to write down Whiskey Rebellion to help you understand this, it won't be the worst idea. To help pay off the war debt, Washington started to tax whiskey. Whiskey itself is just, it's a form of alcohol. And unfortunately for the farmers, mostly in Pennsylvania, who grew the grains to make the whiskey, were very angry. The problem with the whiskey is, I'll go back to this. The problem with whiskey is very, it's a lot easier to transport than the grains themselves. So these farmers would make the grains into whiskey, then sell the whiskey for a much higher profit than the grains that they were using to grow it. The farmers, though, felt like they were being targeted, especially because they weren't the richest farmers, near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. So this wasn't a really profitable area, wasn't a really profitable venture, and these farmers saw Shays' Rebellion from earlier, a couple years ago, and they said, hey, let's do this ourselves. So summer of 1794, these farmers in western Pennsylvania staged something called the Whiskey Rebellion. It wasn't a major event. A couple things happened. One group of protesters, They beat up a tax collector and coated him with tar and feathers. Tar is like asphalt. It's like this hot black gooey liquid. And they cover him in feathers, make him look like a chicken. They did this to British tax collectors in the start of the Revolutionary War in Boston, and it's kind of like a homage to what the other, what the Patriots in New England did. It's kind of saying that, these tax collectors in America are no different than the British 20 years earlier. So what Washington does, and this is awesome, Washington himself commanded 13,000 troops to shut down the rebellion. He's the only acting president to lead an army, which is pretty cool. Most of these rebels fled without battle. He captured 20 of them. I mean, the rebellion wasn't that big, and to bring 13,000 troops shows A, the strength of America, B, the idea that they're not going to allow these little rebellions to pop off every once in a while, and C, it sets a precedent that if they want to change laws, they have to do it peacefully. They can't just start attacking people on the streets. And it kind of showed that there is a dominating force in America now. The 20 men that he captured, Washington said he was going to hang them. It turns out he kind of just fibbed to make it seem like he was tough. He let them all go. I'm not going to talk about Northwest Territory. Battle of Fallen Timbers, though, it's this battle against Native Americans. We're starting to have some conflicts on our border between the settlers and Native Americans themselves. In August 20th of 1794 in Ohio, it was a battle between the Americans, of course, and Native Americans and British, who were kind of working together to hold the line against American influence in the frontier. This is a kind of it's a one-sided battle in a lot of ways, simply because the Americans were able to bring in a lot of artillery. That's why it's called the Battle of Fallen Timbers, because they fired off so much artillery, they pretty much knocked the forest down, as they said. The British kind of left the Native Americans high and dry as well, because they didn't want to start another war for the Americans. And because of these Native Americans being destroyed, just army-wise, it led to this very unfair Treaty of Greenville. It pretty much forced the Native Americans to give up the entire state of Ohio, a lot of Michigan, Illinois, Indiana as well, and they gave them about $20,000, which obviously isn't very fair, but it pretty much established the fact that if the Americans wanted land, all they had to do was pay the Native Americans. Now, it wasn't a fair payment, but they still paid them to say, oh, we've given you something of value. That means you agreed to this transaction. Now, of course, if they didn't take this agreement, they probably would have gotten nothing, but that's the agreement that these Native Americans had taken, unfortunately for them. So, last but not least, Washington chose to step down after 2 terms. And you don't have to write any of this down, but I hope you're still watching. This is a cool little thing. He pretty much said, you know what, I'm done. He did 2 terms. He was reelected like one time. And he pretty much said, you know what, this is it, I'm done. And he warned a lot of different things in his farewell speech. This is actually a very helpful thing. What we're going to do on Monday is we're going to look at the farewell speech. But it warns of political parties and divisions. It warns about getting involved with foreign wars and how there's a couple things in government that are instrumental to make things work perfectly. So I hope you have this all written down. I will put up the PowerPoint itself on Classroom if need be, just so you can look at it yourself. Yeah, please make sure you have the Google Docs on Classroom so I can look at it. I don't just want to assume that it's there. I want to be able to see it. All right, guys. Hope this wasn't too bad. Thanks.